What is up, guys? Wrestling Premiere is here. Now, I was watching WrestleMania 17 yesterday, and as I watched the TLC match, I decided, you know what, screw this. I'm just going to make Edge and Christian. That ladder match impressed me so damn much. Now, Edge and Christian are probably my favorite tag team ever. They just oozed charisma and talent. They were so damn entertaining inside or outside the ring. It didn't matter where you put them. They'll perform. The Toronto natives won all of WWE's titles. Edge has 31 titles to his name, while Christian has 20 to his name. Both men won the world title, which is great to see because many tag teams failed to do that. Now in this video, I cover Edge and Christian's rise to the top of WWE's tag team division. For me to cover this one, we gotta go back to the Brood days. Edge and Christian have been best friends since childhood. Both men were poised to follow their dreams and wrestle in the World Wrestling Federation. And it was Edge who signed with WWE first in 1996. In an interview with Chris Jericho on Talk is Jericho, Edge explained how he got signed and how much his salary was. And I quote, "I got called up to JR's office and I sat down and he goes, okay, we got a deal for you. Here it is, and I want to preface this with you will make and do as much work as you put into this." It was for $210 a week because after the currency exchange, that worked out to be 300 Canadian. They said, just keep working. There was no farm system. They said, just keep working, keep getting booked. I got signed at the end of 96. I kept working. Bad News and Jerry wanted Jay and I to go to Japan. Cool, sold, more experience, awesome. Working guys that can't speak English. This is going to be more experience. Also, the WWE paid for Edge's college tuition. Then finally, when I signed my deal, my very first deal, they also paid all of my college fees as a bonus. I think I owed like 40 grand, which they didn't have to do. I always felt that was very, very cool of JR to do. He was like, we're going to take care of your college, by the way. I was like, oh, because that had been hanging over my head while I had been trying to just get somewhere and make it. I was like, oh man, I got this 40 grand that's over my head and I'm making 50 bucks on this show. Cool. Now I'll make him 210. Well, that's not going to chip away at 40 grand. So they took care of that when I signed my deal. So at this point, both Adam and Jay were signed to WWF, but they were allowed to develop elsewhere. Adam's ring name on the indies was Sexton Hardcastle. What the hell? I always thought that was the most unique name ever. Like, it's so random. Imagine he came out to the WWF with that ring name. Would he have succeeded? Anyways, he would become Edge, a guy who was, no pun intended, on the edge. He was a loner. His debut didn't really start off well. His opponent got injured, but nonetheless, big things were in store for Edge. Christian, meanwhile, had yet to debut. In August of 1998, a vampire debuted on WWF TV. It was Gangrel. Now, what we didn't know was that Gangrel knew Edge. Over the next couple of weeks, Gangrel was claiming that Edge is coming home, despite the fact that they were feuding at the same time. At Breakdown in Your House, Edge faced the King of Hearts, Owen Hart. Near the end of the match, a long-haired man hopped the barricade. It looked like he had an issue with Edge, and while he was distracted, Owen Hart capitalized on this by rolling him up for the victory. Edge then went straight after the guy. Now, obviously, you guys know that's Christian. Christian once again cost Edge an elimination match the next night, and it was then revealed that Christian is Edge's brother. At Judgment Day in Your House, Christian beat Taka Michinoku for the WWF Light Heavyweight Championship. This was his debut, by the way, so he won a title in his debut. On the October 26, 1998 episode of Raw or Warzone, Edge aligned with his brother and Gangrel by attacking Kane. The trio tried to dismantle Kane, but they failed. The three would collectively be known as the Brood. The Brood came out of this pit of fire with some awesome music. Gangrel drank a chalice of blood. They gave bloodbaths. They were awesome. Now, following this, the Brood didn't really do much. They had a small feud with Al Snow and the Chop Squad, but other than that, they were just there. Nonetheless, the trio were awesome regardless of their position in the card. It didn't matter if they were jobbers, they were on TV every week, and they were great. On the February 1st, 1999 episode of Raw, the Brood faced Mideon and Viscera of the Ministry of Darkness. That match ended in a no contest after the Acolytes interfered. The Ministry assaulted the Brood while the Undertaker slowly walked towards the ring. At one point, many officials came out to stop this, but the Brood threw them out the ring. Everyone was confused, like, why would the Brood do that? The Ministry continued tearing the Brood apart, and this ended with the Ministry choking Gangrel with a noose. Later that night, the Ministry of Darkness revealed their new members. It was the Brood. So what happened earlier that night was an initiation. Following this, the Brood was just there once again. One positive in this is the fact that they were featured on TV weekly. Over time, there were signs of dissension between the Ministry and the Brood. This began on the March 29, 1999 episode of Raw. The Acolytes had abducted Stephanie McMahon, but then Ken Shamrock forced Christian of the Ministry to give him the whereabouts of Stephanie. Due to this, Ken Shamrock found Stephanie and Christian was punished, while the Brood were forced to hold Christian for the Undertaker to whip. This would come to a head on the April 12, 1999 episode of Raw. On that night, The Undertaker forced Edge and Gangrel to put Christian on the symbol. They decided to turn against the Ministry, and they sparked an all-out brawl. At this point, the Brood were being cheered. I felt like they were tweeners. They weren't heels, but they weren't faces. On the very first episode of SmackDown, which I'm looking to cover in a few weeks, the Brood were set to finally speak for the first time. Doc Hendricks, aka Michael Hayes, interviewed the group. About this promo, well, it was one of the worst. Gangrel was just saying some random things, and Christian didn't utter a single word. As for Edge, he said that we are who we are, the unholy trio. Gangrel took offense to the fact that Hendricks called them a character, a gimmick, and he was given a bloodbath. I believe this ruined Gangrel's chances of being something else in the WWF. Edge, however, showed some signs of potential. After this, they began a feud with the Hardys and Michael Hayes, who wore the Hardys' outfit. Look at that. That looks off to me. During that feud, there was signs of dissension within the Brood. Gangrel accidentally spit some red stuff, probably blood, onto Edge, which cost him the matchup. And the following night, Edge saved one of Godfather's hosts from a piercing from Prince Albert and Droz, and it looked like Gangrel disapproved of this. Following this, it seemed like the Brood was back on the same page, but then Gangrel turned on Edge later that night. Despite having issues with Edge, Gangrel was still trying to keep Christian on his side. He helped him win a matchup at Fully Loaded, and meanwhile, Edge won his first Intercontinental Championship in a live event on July 24th, 1999. Edge would, however, lose the title the next night at Fully Loaded after Gangrel cost him the match. This led to a bloodbath match between the two on the August 2nd, 1999 episode of Raw. At this point, Edge was distraught as it seemed like Christian was on Gangrel's side. But near the end of that bloodbath match, Christian poured the blood onto Gangrel, and finally, Edge and Christian were reunited. The two would feud with the Hardys, who would then become the new Brood after Gangrel joined them, and they were placed in a best-of-5 series with the winning team gaining the services of Terry Runnels. They traded victories up until No Mercy when both teams faced off in a ladder match. To me, this is one of the most revolutionary matches in WWE history. They completely changed the ladder match. This is one of those matches, it's up there with Shawn and Razor. This is comparable to Shawn and Razor. Those two revolutionized the ladder match. But once again, the Hardys and Edge and Christian, they took the ladder match to new heights. They innovated the matchup minute by minute. They hit some insane spots that probably hurt them to this day, and everyone played their part in making this 1999's match of the year for me. In the end, it was Jeff Hardy who grabbed a bag of money to win the $100,000 and Terry Runnels' managerial services. Despite losing the matchup, Edge and Christian looked good in defeat as the fans gave them a standing ovation. As for the Hardys, this victory basically turned them into fan favorites. The next night on Raw, the fans showed both teams respect. They gave him a standing ovation, and Edge and Christian came out and congratulated the Hardys on their victory. Basically, that match put both teams on the map. If you tell me what match made Edge and Christian famous, I tell you it was the No Mercy ladder match. Same for the Hardys. The Hardys then kicked Gangrel's ass, and they were done with him. Now, Gangrel had this to say about the Brood. And I quote, "It was really only supposed to be a shuttle for Edge and Christian. They came to me and said, Edge. They told me they were going to put the belt on Edge in the future, and they clearly told me that. They pulled me aside and said, hey, this guy's a future champion and all that. They knew. I don't know if Edge knew. They made it clear for me to know not to let anything to happen to Edge. Take care of these guys and make sure nothing happens. Just make sure everything's cool there." And I was cool at that station in life. The Brood thing wasn't supposed to be anything, but then it started gaining momentum and it was unstoppable. It was kind of like a wildfire, so Edge was always meant to be something special. Despite not being pushed following the Brood, Gangrel is proud of the fact that he contributed to Edge and Christian's rise to the top. Edge and Christian, they're both awesome individuals. I want to say this. I'm so proud of them and the way their careers went. It's sad that they ended so early, but they're good Canadians, they're good with their money, and they knew what to do, so they're well off. They're doing alright and they're very happy, so I'm proud of them. After No Mercy, Edge and Christian became friends with the Hardys. They did wrestle one another occasionally, but there was mutual respect between both teams. Over time, though, Edge and Christian grew frustrated with the Hardys after Matt called them superhero babyfaces on Heat. The two teams were then set to face the Dudleys for the WWF Tag Team Championships in a ladder match at WrestleMania 2000. Once again, the Hardys and ENC found a way to innovate the ladder match. With the Dudleys using tables and Jeff hitting swantons off the top of ladders, it made for a ridiculously entertaining, spectacular, show-stealing matchup that culminated with Edge and Christian victorious. Finally, they were tag team champions. Two kids that grew up dreaming to be tag team champions have just done it. After WrestleMania, Edge and Christian defended the titles many times, nearly every single week. Raw, SmackDown, pay-per-view, everything. And every single time they retained the gold. On the May 1st, 2000 episode of Raw, Edge and Christian began to show a lot of personality. This was also the night where they stopped running through the crowd because they were heels. The duo decided to give the fans a 5-second pose. Brian Gerwitz, a former WWE writer and currently The Rock's writer, explained WWE's perspective on Edge and Christian becoming comedy characters. Yeah, that was a big back and forth that I used to have when the subject of Edge and Christian came up, and it was like, they're too goofy. They're never going to be main eventers if they're going to be doing this type of ridiculousness. And my argument was, and I'm sure it was not eloquated in a nice, mature way at the time, it was probably more like, you're stupid and running away or something like that. But the point that I did eventually get across was, it's like, well, you gotta start somewhere, right? Like, Edge went from a silent rage and puffy shirt and evil vampires and running around the subway for some reason, and now he has got an identity. Well said. During this time period, they also befriended Kurt Angle. These three made idiots of themselves, like, for example, this segment at Judgment Day 2000, the Jug Band. Hope y'all enjoy. On the May 29th, 2000 episode of Raw, Edge and Christian managed to piss off Joe C. This would come back to bite them several minutes later as Joe C helped Too Cool win the tag team championships. Later on, they threw him into a trash can and Christian blasted the trash can with a chair before throwing it into a wall and straight onto a pile of trash. Edge and Christian would regain the titles at King of the Ring. Their first feud as champions once again was with the APA. On the July 10th episode of Raw, Christian claimed that he had the sniffles and he couldn't team up with Edge to defend the titles. He convinced Edge to face one of the APA in a singles match. Get it? Singles match? Edge and Christian once again found a way to escape their scheduled title match on that week's SmackDown. This time, Edge claimed that due to the disprofessionality of The Rock, he suffered a back injury from a devastating spinebuster and a rock bottom. Edge also said that he was in bad shape, like Golden State Warrior bad shape, and the fans booed him. Right after that match between Christian and Farouk, Edge was feeling good. He was selling his injury, but he attacked Farouk, and it looked like he was fine. On the final SmackDown before Fully Loaded, Edge and Christian decided to invite the Acolytes to a bar. This guy, Just Joe, who you may or may not know, tried to inform the APA that Edge and Christian invited him. He failed to do so after not knocking. He completely ignored the door. Why didn't you knock? Once the APA let him in, they didn't want to hear anything. They kicked him out. Later that night, Joe went up to the APA and he gave him a tip on where Edge and Christian were. He stirred the pot and this led to the APA walking down to the bar. Once the APA entered that bar, Edge and Christian's buddies tried dismantling the APA. Charlie Haas and Co. got their asses handed to them by the kings of barroom brawling. As the Acolytes walked outside, Edge and Christian ambushed them with 2x4s, and the duo mocked them. At this point, you'd think Edge and Christian were confident in their abilities heading into Fully Loaded, but during the pay-per-view, Edge informed Commissioner Foley that Christian has food poisoning. Foley wasn't buying it, and later on we find an ill Christian. A doctor notified Foley that Christian might not be able to compete, but later on we find out that Christian was faking this. Once Foley entered the room, Christian ran straight into the bathroom to vomit. Then we got a shot of Christian, and oh my god, the look on his face. He realized that he's just been busted by Foley. The title match was still on. Edge and Christian got their asses handed to them, and when they were on the brink of defeat, Edge decided to push the referee and blast Farouk with the title, which meant that Edge and Christian retained their championships. The Acolytes didn't take this lightly, and they pounced on the tag champions. Since Edge and Christian got themselves disqualified, Commissioner Foley booked them in a triple threat tag team titles match against the Dudleys and the Hardys the next night. During that match, the Hardys and the Dudleys were on the verge of capturing the titles, but once again Edge and Christian got lucky and they retained the titles. Following this, Edge and Christian continued to defend their titles nearly every week and insult whatever city sports team and offer a 5-second pose. During this time period, they also reignited their feuds with both the Dudleys and the Hardys. This led to Mick Foley booking the first ever TLC match between the three teams at SummerSlam. Once again, these teams managed to reinvent ladder matches. They sacrificed their bodies to entertain everyone, and it was clearly match of the night. I don't know how they did it, but every single time they have a ladder match, it tops the previous one. The end of the match saw Devon and Jeff Hardy hanging for their life. They wanted to grab the titles, but it was ultimately Devon who fell. Jeff Hardy managed to hang on, but then Edge and Christian threw a ladder onto him to send him to the ground. The duo then grabbed the titles to go 2-in-1 in ladder matches. JR was once again pissed off at the result. The next night, Edge and Christian came out to personally congratulate their opponents. They were all serious in the beginning, but once both teams came out, Edge and Christian had some fun. They mocked the Hardys and the Dudleys, and in the end, the real Hardys seen enough and they assaulted E and C. Both men managed to escape. Since the Hardys were going to feud with Edge and Christian once again, a matchup was made between both teams at Unforgiven in a steel cage match. In the weeks leading up to their match, Edge and Christian continued to make fun of the Hardys. There was this one segment in particular where Edge and Christian watched some clips from the Hardys' childhood, and they tore into them. They mocked Jeff and Matt. The Hardys heard enough, and they went straight into the projection room. This was a trap as Edge and Christian ambushed the Hardys. So ENC had the upper hand heading into Unforgiven. At the pay-per-view, both teams once again put in a performance. Lita got involved and she hit a hurricanrana on Christian off of a ladder, and this match ended with the Hardys escaping the cage to become the new tag team champions. Like, it's a steel cage match, yet they still used ladders. Ladder matches were in their blood. Edge and Christian didn't take that loss lightly, and they were set to face the Hardys in a grueling ladder match the next night on Raw. The only problem with this was if ENC lost, then they could never challenge the Hardys for the tag titles. Edge once again hit a spear on Jeff Hardy off the ladder, but in the end, it was Lita who was the X Factor as she cost ENC the matchup. Since they lost, they can never challenge the Hardys for the titles. So Edge and Christian decided to become Los Conquistadors. Some were suspicious about Los Conquistadors' identities, but the duo managed to get a matchup against the Hardys and No Mercy for the tag team titles. Los Conquistadors won that matchup and the titles. Right after the match, Edge and Christian congratulated Los Conquistadors and challenged them to a title match the next night on Raw. On Raw, Christian got attacked by the Dudleys and he asked Edge to postpone the tag team match, but he refused. Instead, he was going out there alone. That tag match didn't end well for Edge as the Conquistadors beat Edge using the Hardy Boys' moves. It was then revealed to be both Matt and Jeff. The Commissioner Mick Foley came out and he showed a clip from earlier that night. It was footage of Edge admitting that they beat the Hardys at No Mercy, and Foley announced that Edge and Christian's title reign was in the record books, but since they lost the titles to the Hardys, it was one of the shortest tag team title reigns. So basically, Edge and Christian are able to face the Hardys for the titles, but they weren't champions anymore since Matt and Jeff beat Edge a few minutes earlier. Right around this time period, they really began to team up with Kurt Angle. One segment in particular was really too much. It was Edge's birthday and Christian gave him a gift. It was kazoos and streamers. Triple H obviously crashed the party, and after hearing ENC play his theme song, he kicked them out. It was one of my favorite segments of theirs. Like, they were acting like complete goofballs, and Triple H is like, alright, get out. And they're like, relax, I'll play your song too. One of their best segments. With Kurt Angle, the trio were known as Team ECK, E-C-K. ENC continued to play with their kazoos and streamers up until Armageddon, where they captured the WWF Tag Team Championships. That title reign wouldn't last long as the weird team of The Undertaker and The Rock beat them for the titles. On that week's SmackDown, however, Edge and Christian regained the titles. As champs, the duo began a feud with the Dudleys once again. This led to a title match between the two at the Royal Rumble, and they lost. Afterwards, they tried to regain the titles, but they failed. It wasn't until the March 5th, 2001 episode of Raw when Christian planted the seeds for when ENC regained the titles. He cost the Dudleys the championships. On the March 19th, 2001 episode of Raw, Edge and Christian stole the Dudleys' spot in a tag team title match against the Hardys. They managed to convince the Hardys to defend the titles against them, and with the help of the debuting Rhino, Edge and Christian became the new tag team champions. Rhino ended up being added to Team ECK, which became Team Wreck. While the coach was waiting for Stone Cold at the airport, we find the Dudleys. They were late for their tag titles, and I believe someone messed with their reservations or something like that. I'm not sure. Once they arrived, they demanded their title matches. The Dudleys forced Regal to make the match, and later that night, Spike Dudley debuted and he assisted the Dudleys in recapturing the WWF Tag Team Championships. Eventually, TLC 2 was made for WrestleMania. This one was the best one. Why? I just watched it and it was 15 minutes packed of carnage. There was spot after spot, and once again they innovated this type of match. Jeff Hardy was taking some really crazy bumps. He had that swanton on both Rhino and Spike, and he took that spear from Edge off of a ladder. It was wild. In the end, Rhino carried Christian to the top of the ladder, and once again, Edge and Christian were victorious. The duo held the titles for about 3 weeks before the Brothers of Destruction, The Undertaker and Kane, won the titles from them. After this, they failed to recapture the tag titles, and they decided to focus on King of the Ring. ENC made it to the semifinals where they faced their Team Wreck mates, Kurt Angle and Rhino. Christian failed to beat Angle, and Edge successfully beat Rhino. Shane McMahon cost Christian his matchup, hence why Christian lost. Once again, Shane McMahon interfered later that night, and this time, he cost Angle the matchup, and Edge was King of the Ring. After King of the Ring, Edge and Christian turned into fan favorites, but over time, Christian began to grow jealous of Edge's successes, like he's hoisting the King of the Ring trophy in the air when it's not his. And over time, he's just jealous. Christian's jealousy boiled over, and on the September 3rd, 2001 episode of Raw, Christian turned on Edge. In their hometown of Toronto, Christian blasted Edge with a chair, and he pledged his allegiance to the Alliance. This led to an IC title matchup between the two at Unforgiven. and for some reason the commentary team continuously called them brothers. Christian would finally capture the Intercontinental Championship for the first time at the pay-per-view, and the feud between the two continued. At No Mercy, Edge and Christian faced off in their match specialty, a ladder match. Edge recaptured the titles, and the feud was over. All in all, these two were really entertaining. Like, it was so awesome to see these two grow from the beginning when they were in the Brood all the way up to now. I might have to continue this series and talk about Edge's run on SmackDown in 2002 and Christian's run on Raw with the Un-Americans and that stuff like that. So I might have to do that. If this video succeeds, then you best be certain that I will talk about Edge's 2002 run and the Un-Americans. And that's it for this video. Make sure you hit the Unprettier on the like button and perhaps the spear on the subscribe button. Peace. I'm out.